Ken Jr. was 5 months old by the time his father got home. So he and I got on the train and went to Maine. Ken Sr. was living with his parents. I think I probably got here the day after he landed. He landed in Bangor. And so he met me at the train station, and what a reunion. It was just so wonderful. And it was October by then of 1944. And in no time, I was pregnant again. After a little while, Ken was reassigned. We went to Atlantic City for reassignment, and then later we went to, a little bit later, we went to Miami Beach. And it was hot. And I really didn't like that too well because I was pregnant. And he was assigned to teaching in Texas. So we went to Waco. He was going to be at Blackland Field. There were two nice airfields there in Waco. And we rented a house from a woman. It was just a tiny little house. It wasn't a very good house, but that was all right. It had a big backyard. But I remember the chiggers in the backyard biting my child. Ugh. And she had a little dog, a really nice little bulldog, and like a Boston Bull. And he liked Ken, and Ken liked him. And so he used to play with that dog. And we had a wonderful babysitter. Every time I wanted to go to an affair at the field, I would get Mary Lou down, and for a few hours she would babysit with the children. And her mother would come and check on her. She was only 15 years old. It's such a pretty girl, and she loved the children. And her mother would come and check on her every couple of hours, make sure that she didn't need anything. So I felt very secure. When John was born, it was on a weekend, and he was home from Brooks Field in San Antonio. He was instructing instructors at that time, and Ken was a wonderful teacher. He really had abilities, and I can see the same ability in my eldest child, Ken the second. He's a great teacher, and some people are and some people aren't. You just can't make a good teacher, really, really good teacher, out of a person who wasn't born with those talents. After Ken was discharged from the service, we lived with his mother and father in Liberty, Maine, and it was really great to be visiting with Grandma and Grandpa Priest, and they were so good. They were just the greatest couple in the world. I could never have had a better mother-in-law than she. And Grandpa just thought John was the most wonderful child he'd ever seen. And John was just beginning to walk at that time. And he would totter around and always find Grandpa's knee. And he'd climb up in Grandpa's lap, and Grandpa just held John so much and would talk with him, and they had wonderful times together. And I think Ken was a little bit older, a year older, and so he just was playing by himself or doing other things. He wasn't sitting in laps. My husband never was idle. He always wanted to be working. So he would help his dad, and he helped him do everything that could be done around the place. And then it was winter, the dead of winter, and he knew the next door neighbor very, very well. He had grown up with him and with his girls. He was the age of Ken's father. And so Ken decided that he would just drop by occasionally and help him. And so he did. And this neighbor, Burley Turner, had a boat shop. He built small wooden white pine strip plank boats, race boats for Carbisi County. And Ken was over there more and more and more helping Burley. And he was very, very good at woodworking always. And he was also very, very good mechanically. And so one day, Burley Turner said, you know, I'm an old man, and I am not going to be building these boats much of any longer. And why don't you start a boat building business? Because you already can build them. And Ken kind of laughed and said, well, I don't really know what I'm going to do. I haven't decided yet. And in a few days, Burley Turner said, wouldn't you like to buy a place around here? Wouldn't you like to live here? And Ken said, yes, I grew up here, and I think it's a wonderful place to live. But I've got to go where I can get a job. And so Burley said, well, my mother-in-law's house is vacant and for sale. She just died. And so we talked about it, and I like it here very much. And so Ken decided that he would take Burley Turner up on his offer to build his type of boat. And but Ken didn't really copy his boat. He designed his own. He was a good designer. And we moved into the house, and it was a house with a big, long, long set of sheds before you would get to the barn. And it was a huge barn, really big barn. And so Ken felt that he would convert the barn into a boat shop. And I have a picture of Burley and his granddaughter and Ken talking about that, designing it in the barn. So Ken, over the years, Ken completely renovated the house. It had to have new sills, a new roof, all kinds of things. It was just like building a new house. New chimneys. Oh, really, I don't know how he did it. And all the time he was building a boat shop, and he had a 2-room actually boat shop in the barn, and I used to help him. I would get in the boat. These white pine strip plank boats were ribbed with oak, and he built a steamer to put the oak strips in, and the ribs were hot, 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 and he would wear gloves and bring them over and set them into the boat just right so that they fit perfectly. And I would hold the weight while he got under the boat on the outside of the boat and pounded the nails into the ribs. So I helped build boats. It was nice. It was kind of fun. And the house came equipped with I guess it was an iron sink and cold water in the sink. And we had to put in bathroom and do a lot of renovating in the kitchen. And there was a great big range, an iron range, and it had a huge oven, and I used to enjoy that so much because I love to cook and I love to bake, and I would just can a lot of things from our vegetable garden. And I remember how much work that was. I never really enjoyed canning because it was a lot of work and it was always in the hottest weather. And one day I remember coming in from the boat shop just for a minute. I guess I had left my kitchen. And John had climbed up on the wood box to where there was a little pass-through to the dining room. And he was sitting on that shelf, and there was a big decorated cake on either side of him. And he had dipped into the frosting on each. And he was having a wonderful time. He probably, I don't know how old he was, but just old enough to climb. I think one of the cakes, as I remember it, was decorated with cherries. That probably was his favorite. When we had lived in this house, which Ken had just completely done over, and the boat shop, the boat building business was thriving. And when we had lived there 9 years, we woke up one morning. I woke up one morning because I'm a light sleeper, I guess. It was 3:30 in the morning, and I could see flames, and the L part of the house was all in flames, and there was no water, there was no telephone, there was no lights. Everything was just dead. And there were thunder showers in the air, so I really don't know what happened. But we got out of the house in pajamas and barefooted, and we really had a hard time getting. I was worried about Ken the second because he was sleeping upstairs, and he was a hard person to wake up sometimes. But he finally heard me screaming at him, and down he came. So we had trained our children to what to do in case of a fire, and it's a good thing we had. So we were very busy just picking up a few things that we could carry out with us, and we had to get out fast. So the children went out ahead just as soon as Ken came down the stairs, and they did exactly what we had asked them to do. When we got outside the building, we saw them over across the road in front of Virgie's house holding hands. I'll never forget that. There's one thing that I really regret, and I often think of it. my children always obeyed me, and so they just went without a word when I took them up to Marty Brown's, and while the house was still just in flames, big, big fire. And the thing that I was uppermost in my mind, and I still think about it, is a traveler's fire insurance ad. And this family, a mother and father and a child or two, were huddled under an umbrella, which was a traveler's umbrella, of course. And they were watching their house go up in flames. And I just didn't want to be that person. I did not want to huddle under an umbrella and just stand there and watch my house burning. So I took the children up to the Browns, and they went without a word, but I wish now that they could have had the experience of watching their house burn and watching the neighbors all come and try to help. And there was a fire engine in town, and in 1947, I think, the year that it was so dry and Bar Harbor burned and so many other places, Waterboro and many towns were wiped out. This town had bought rakes, great big tined rakes, metal tined rakes, and the purpose of those rakes was to stir up the earth in the woods and make sure that there weren't underground fires. If you walked over them, it probably would feel hot, but other than that, how would you detect a fire underground? And so this truck that they had, this fire truck, so-called fire truck, and it did have a little water on it and that sort of thing, but the house was flaming, so that how could a little bit of water do any good? But they did have those rakes, and Manley Skates took an axe and knocked out the woodwork between two windows in a room where I had bird's eye maple twin beds, and he got the great big bureau out with that rake. Can you imagine? And he couldn't go in, but he managed to hitch that out. Manley was a very, very smart person. And he got both the beds out, and one of them was burned. We used those beds for years and years and years, and I wish I still had them. And we'd had this whole set, a desk and some chairs and a bureau and a highboy and the two beds, and it was just a beautiful thing if I still had it. And the bureau held all my children's Christmas birthday presents. They had both just had birthdays, one in April and one in May, and this fire occurred the last of May. It was a rainy May. It was a very damp month, and I was cold. I think maybe that's one reason that I wanted to take my children up to Brown's. And but there were my children's clothes all in the bureau, not coats and so forth, but underwear, all kinds of underwear and shirts and that sort of thing. We lost everything.
Did people have insurance back then?
We didn't have insurance. We had it was insured for as much as we could insure it for, and but the boat shop being attached to the house, the whole structure was considered a boat shop, and it came in that category. And it was in the category of an open mill. So we were insured for about 20% of our loss.
Oh, it's not much.
But business was going very well. It was strong. And we rented a place and from the Lehmans. They had a little shop across from their house, and we moved into it and continued building boats all summer.
Do you have anything from that house still?
I do. I have a rocking chair that it's in my bedroom, Christine, and it escaped the fire when I was 7 years old. My mother and Jane Hewitt took it out of the house, and it was on the porch. It was kind of a dilapidated old chair by the time that this fire occurred, the 1955 fire. And so Manley Skates again he got the Adirondack chairs that Ken had made off the porch and got that rocking chair. So I do have one relic. Bob Reed, a wonderful man, a dear friend, was always saying that he would like to cane that chair for me. But I didn't want him to do it because I knew that I couldn't pay him. And I knew that he would not accept money. And so the poor chair needed caning for a long, long time. And finally, one day I said, Bob, I don't ever want to part with this chair. And nobody can even sit in it at this point, and I'd like it to be useful. So how about you and me agreeing? We'll have a business proposition, and you can cane the chair. I'll have it refinished first after you take the cane out. And you cane it just as you want to. And I will pay you. But I insist, you've got to agree that you will take some pay for this. All right? He agreed. So one day, a long time from then, Marcia, Bob's wife, called me up and said, Bob's got your chair ready. So I went over, and Bob was in his shop, and I visited with Marcia for a good long time. And after a while, Bob came in from the shop, and he said, "Do you want to see your chair?" And I said, "I do, and I want to take it home." And while we're right here in the house, I have my checkbook right in my hand, and I want to pay you. And he didn't say anything for a little while, and then he said, "I know two people who do a lot for others, and all I can say is pass it on." And I've tried to do that. And everyone rallied around after that fire. Money in 1955, money wasn't what it is in 2005. If someone gave you a check for $50, I would almost think it would amount to $750 now. I'm just guessing at that. But Ken's former employer brought out a check, and just so many people produced money. And the town of Palermo had a baked bean supper. The Togus Fishing Game Club had a baked bean supper. And, just so many people. My cousin sold silverware and silver plate. And she sold that around the neighborhood. I know Howard and Betty Glidden were about to get married in 1955, and she sold them a set of silver. And it was just amazing to us how much people wanted us to stay in Palermo and how much they did for us. And we had this land, which was very swampy, this land where my present house is. And but we did own it, and we had a well that was fairly good. And so finally we decided that we would stay right here in Palermo. And I'm glad we did. We built a shop, one big shop, and it was near the road, but not nearly as close to the road as the old house that had burned was. That was practically in the road. And I had always dreamed of having a party to which I could invite everybody, and I mean everybody. Now that was our chance to have a party. So we had this 2-room and a plainer room boat shop, and it was the size it's the size it is now. I don't really know the dimensions. So we just let it be known that we wanted everybody to come. And it was in the winter, it was in December, and our house had been built, but it was not finished inside. The fireplace was working, so my mother and my grandmother stayed in the house and served tea and coffee or whatever to the older people who would stray down here and wanted to see the house. And we had a 3-piece band up at the shop. They all had donated their time and had brought the piano in, and we had a dance. And everybody came, people from miles and miles around. And I remember some dear friends of ours, the Louds, coming from Bangor, and they had brought Ike Bemis with them. And Ike, Lou Loud said way back beyond the schoolhouse, there were so many cars. He said, well, I better park up here and we'll walk down. And Ike said, for heaven's sake, Lou, are you crazy? In this little country town, of course there won't be that many people. But there were 250 people.
That's great.
And I think I have some of them in the guest book, but not all of them. And Leah Bandon and Marty Brown and quite a few others, Grace Gates and so forth, took care of refreshments. They had all kinds of food for all those people. We used the plainer room for a cloakroom. There were people with fur coats, and that place was just loaded with coats. And we had a good time. It was wonderful. Speaking of people responding to our needs, we had all kinds of clothes given to us, more than we could use. And some people put money in a special account that Stella Foster Cox, was handling out at the Depositors Trust Company. And our doctor sent us, he sent Ken 2 beautiful suits that were just extras that from his own wardrobe, and he knew they would perfectly fit him. And that was wonderful. And we also found out later, much later, after his death, that he was responsible for some of the anonymous gifts in the account. So people are good. we moved into the house in December, and it was unfinished inside. The petitions were up, and I guess all the sheetrock was on, and there were plywood floors. And we lived with those plywood floors until I remember when we were going to have linoleum put on the kitchen floor. They had to put new plywood on because the plywood had worn so much. So you can see that we lived here for a long time with, but Ken was building boats. He really had to do that for income. Those were hard times. They really were. And we just put every penny that we could get into the shop. And I had lower shelves in my kitchen so that I could put the pots and pans and so forth away, so that I wouldn't have everything on top of the counters. And in, I think it must have been in the 60s, I went with my mother to San Francisco for a little trip, and when I came back, Ken had all the upper cabinets built, and it was such a thrill. He wanted a surprise for me. He was always doing such wonderful, wonderful things like that. What a great man. It was really funny. In 1955, a dear friend, Lloyd Hewitt, built our house, our new house, and the house that I'm sitting in right this minute. And he said, we designed it. I designed a lot of it. And he said, you have 2 good-sized bedrooms, but there's plenty of room for 3 bedrooms. And you need 3 bedrooms. And I said, no, I want big rooms. And so we will have just 2 bedrooms. And he said, well, you'll be sorry. Well, I guess those were prophetic words. Because in no time I was pregnant. We moved into the house in December, and by March I was pregnant. And so Lloyd Hewitt is somewhat responsible for Michael, I guess. And Michael, it was just such a joy. I was sick all the time before I had Michael. But it was just so wonderful to have him. And he was born in Augusta. John was born in Waco, Texas, and Ken was born in San Francisco. So it was great to have one born in Maine. And he was such a good baby and such a good boy. And my mother and my grandmother were still alive, and it was wonderful for them to be able to see this baby all the time, and as they hadn't the others. And he was just absolutely great. And having a baby at age 38 brought us down as he grew older and got into school and into scouting and so forth. It brought us down a generation. We were working and playing with people who were, quite a few years younger than we. And those were great associations, knowing the McKinneys and the Potters and all the people in scouting and all the school things. And my kids they all went to the University of Maine, because we really didn't have any money for private colleges. and they got good educations. They did all right, and they're smart boys. Now, there was something else I was going to say about Michael. Oh, and they all brought such wonderful wives home. Maybe I didn't have any girls, but I eventually got the girls. Susan and Gail and Terry are so great. And I always think of Doreen as my child, too, Ken's first wife, and the mother of Joan and Holly. John and Gail have Susan, and I think the world of her. She's the one who looks more like me and is built more like me. In January of 1961, he had a heart attack. He did recover from it, and he resumed his usual big work day. He worked awfully hard. And in 1971, January, he had another heart attack, and that one was diagnosed pretty soon. And they really did a few more things. They already knew about cholesterol and all that, so he went on a low-fat diet, and we always stayed on that from then on. And then in 1981, he had another heart attack in January. Why January? 10 years apart for 30, let's see, 1, 2,
That's strange.
20 years. 20 years. And in 1981, he just didn't recover from this heart attack. He died in March. And I think that he was ready to die because he, one day I came down from the shop, and he was sitting at the table watching the birds, and he said, "I don't see any way out." And I said, "Well, let's have a little bit more consultation and just see if there aren't some other things that we can do. Let's get our doctor to refer us to Boston, and we'll go there next week." That was about Friday, I think. And he said okay. But then when the first of the week came, he wasn't a candidate for any surgery of any kind. We'd always known that. And when the first of the week came, he said, "I don't want to go to the doctor today. Let's just ride down to Hewitt's." And so we went around to not only Hewitt's, but several of our other friends. And sometimes, I guess maybe one place, he went in the house and visited for a little while. And the rest of the visits, they came out. It was just as though he was going around to say goodbye to all his friends. And then his birthday was the 13th of March. And I think that may have been on a Wednesday. And the day after that, he was seated on the couch, and Michael was out in the evening, and I had pulled a chair right up close to the couch, and we were having the most wonderful conversation. And television was on, but not the sound. And so at 9 o'clock, he glanced over at television, which was really a little bit out of my range of vision at that moment. And he said, "That's the Love Boat. Remember when we went up the Inside Passage and what a good time we had in Alaska?" And then, and he was smiling, and I glanced over, and that Love Boat thing was just starting. And so he just took a deep breath and keeled over. And I knew he was dead, but I did CPR anyway. And I couldn't, I knew it was just no use. And so I called John and had them call the ambulance and call Dale and Herb Flint, because they had first aid things, and Herb rode in the ambulance with him to Augusta, which was a great comfort to me.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be with him, and I rode in the front of the ambulance, but they wouldn't let me in the back, and I just didn't want to be separated from him. And I remember just almost fighting to get in the back, but they put me in the front. And so we got to the emergency room, and of course it just wasn't any use, but they cut his sweater off, and they zapped him, and I went out into the waiting room where all three of our sons were, and he was dead. That's all there was to it. And a young doctor whom I didn't know very well, maybe I'll think of his name. He wasn't in our doctor's practice very long. But what a compassionate guy. And he had come over. He was there at the emergency room when we got there. And he came out with tears in his eyes, and he didn't say anything. But he shook hands with Ken and John and Michael, and went out with these tears streaming down his face. So there is compassion. It's a good world in many ways. The business was growing. It had grown. Way back in the 60s. I just should check with Ken too on these dates, but I would say in the 60s, wooden boats became a little bit unfashionable because fiberglass was coming in, and there just weren't people around here using fiberglass. They were experimenting with it a lot, and you couldn't find anyone who knew anything about it. But my husband just learned for himself, and there was a lot of experimenting and a lot of talking with resin companies and glass companies, and finally he felt secure enough so that he could build some boats, and he did. And eventually he was one of the persons who formed, he was right in there at the start. So Kenway Corporation helped to formulate the Bureau of Standards. You know, if you write in and get that government booklet, the Kenway Corporation and just a few others, fiberglass companies, formulated those standards for fiberglass. We were building boats out of fiberglass, but there was your income from February to July, and you had to make that money last all year, and it was very hard to do. So we really wanted to get into some part of fiberglass, in the fiberglass field, where we could have a steadier income. So we subcontracted with Industrial Air in Waltham, Mass, and we got into the paper mills, got to know them a little bit, and we built hoods, and I have a picture of the first hood that we installed. I think it was International Paper. Ken has that picture, but we can get it when he gets home. And we did quite a bit of work for Industrial Air. And then Industrial Air went bankrupt. And we were on our own. So, but we knew people in the pulp and paper industry and purchasing agents in all the mills. So we just kept right on supplying the mills with industrial fiberglass, pipe and elbows and whatever they wanted. And the business grew, and we built more buildings and hired more men. And then in about 12 years ago, I think it was, we bought land in Augusta. I think we have around a little more than 50 acres, between 50 and 60 acres now. And we built a really modern fiberglass plant with really, really good ventilation and all that. Well-designed fiberglass plant in right in the middle of that plot of land. And now we have to enlarge that. We doubled the size of it after about 4 years because we had so much business. And now we're building boats again, and we're building maritime skiffs, and we've got to enlarge the place again. In fact, I guess we're in the process of it now. It was 1963. The local public health nurse, whom I didn't know very well, Mrs. Nodden, came to visit me one day. I had met her a couple of times, and she said, "I'm going to retire. I'm getting out of this job. I've enjoyed it very, very much, but it's time for me to get out." I think she had some health problems coming on. "And I want you to be my successor." And I said, "This is utterly ridiculous. I don't want to work. I don't want a job." And she said, "Well, I think you should do it." And I said, "No, no way." And she said, "Doesn't your husband want you to have a job?" And I said, "No, of course he doesn't." And she said, well, you just tell him that you don't have enough to do and you want to get out in the world and work. And I said, he'd laugh at me. And, but eventually she called on me and called on me. And so eventually I said, all right, I'll do it for a while. So I went to the Department of Public Health Nursing, and I talked with Mary Sullivan, and apparently she liked me, and I had had a little bit of public health nursing training, and I had worked for the city of Augusta for the city physician, Dr. Dyer, and that was an experience. And that was before World War II, and people didn't have very much money, and our clients, the persons who needed help from the city with their health care, all worked at the mill, and they didn't make very much money. And if they were young and having babies, you know, it was stretching their dollars. So I learned a lot in that year that I worked for Dr. Dyer. And but back to the 60s, I worked in Waldo County and a little bit in Kennebec County. And I had a big workload because I had many towns, and I ran school clinics and well baby clinics and follow up home care, and I had to refuse a great deal of it. The doctors would call me and say, could you go to somebody's house and give them a daily shot of something that they needed, and you know, I couldn't always do that. I was just one person. But I loved public health nursing. It was just wonderful experiences. And the people of Waldo County, oh, they're all my friends. I know them all. I knew them all at that time, at least. And they're just wonderful. What staunch, innovative characters. They've had to be. They've had to be tough. And they are tough, and they are survivors. Contraception, as we know it, was absolutely unknown. And as a consequence, maybe just naturally, I should say, there were an awful lot of teenage pregnancies. Girls would drop out of high school in my freshman year and all the years when they were 15, 16, and on and on and on. And an awful lot of good babies, beautiful babies, were conceived in back seats of cars, and sometimes hanging May baskets in the spring. It was cold, it was damp. My goodness, I don't know how people laid out in the fields, but I guess they did. And they always took care of their babies. The young girls always had parents who were willing either to get the guy, practically force him to marry the girl, or they would hire somebody to marry the girl. Once in a while, I have known of an older man who had never been married, who was hired to marry a young girl. And usually, as I remember it, those marriages worked out very well because of his age and wisdom. And it wasn't until the 60s in this area that a public health nurse like me could steer people toward contraception. And I used to, probably it was toward the mid-60s, I used to sometimes take some of the young women, young married women, to Bangor, where there was a wonderful clinic. I was so thrilled, probably 25 years ago, maybe 30, maybe, I don't know when I was reading Smithsonian Magazine, and I came across an article on fiber optics. Well, believe me, I read that, and I was so excited. And I thought, this is going to change the world. It really, really has marvelous, unlimited possibilities. And when you think of what has happened since 30 years ago, wow, I'm glad that I'm alive right now. It's wonderful. And I'll contrast communication between two people as it was in 1944 in the country, in a very rural area, with what it is now. My mother, I lived in San Francisco, and my mother knew that my baby was due. And so her phone rang. We had made an arrangement for me, for my grandmother to call a friend in Augusta, and the friend, and give her the message that the baby was born, and all about it. And then this friend, Dorothy, would telephone my mother, who was on a rural party line. And we had everybody listened in. That was their recreation and their entertainment. And I don't remember how many people there were on a party line, but it was a lot, like as many as 10 at least.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that phone ringing was just right. It was very apropos. And the story about the phone call when my oldest son, Ken, was born is that all these people were on the line because they also were interested in whether my baby was a boy or a girl, or and how much he weighed and everything. So one of these listeners, somebody who did this all day just to keep up with the news, she had a little dog, and he would yip, and you always knew she was on the line. And so my mother, when Dorothy called her, she couldn't hear very well, with very poor connection. And it was a little locally owned telephone company in Washington. And so my mother calmly said, if you will all please get off the line, I will get Dorothy's message. I think that maybe Mildred has had her baby, and I will tell you all about it. I will call you, May. And this was the one with the dog. And you can call everybody else. And they all hung up. You could hear it when people hung up on that line. And just think, this call, this phone that just rang, was Denver, Colorado, and you could hear it all over the room, actually. Yeah, is a cell phone. So I hope to live a lot longer, and it's going to be mighty interesting to see where technology is going and where communications in particular is going. I can't imagine the world 20 years from now. I really can't. I cannot imagine my great-grandchildren's lives and opportunities. There's always been a man in my life. I love men. And ever since I was 16, with the exception of about 3 years after my husband died, I have always had a male escort to take me to concerts and out to dinner and that sort of thing. And I just kind of depend upon men. I relate to them, and I have 3 sons, and I guess that I have more men friends than I do women friends. And I love women. I really have some dear, dear friends, and who are of the female gender. And but somehow or other, I always need a man around. And some of these men, just like so many women, uh, they revert back to people they've gone to school with. And in the days of Freddie being in my life, I think Freddie that lived in New Hampshire, and I think that he used to come down here for about 10 years, as long as he was able. He finally died. And we had good times together. And he would come down weekends, and we would enjoy many, many trips together locally around Maine mostly and around New Hampshire. And then came Jack. Jack was another story. He was a classmate of Freddie's, and they were all the age of my husband. And Jack was the most direct contrast to Freddie that you'd ever know. And probably I was drawn to him because he was a contrast, and I was interested. It appealed to me. That appealed to me. For about 10 years, I lived in Honolulu with Jack, and but for the last 4 years, I've been home. I've been in Maine. And I think the reason for that, the main reason, is that my family is so interesting and the business is so interesting, the way it's growing, that I just want to be here and find out, be on the spot and find out exactly what's going on. And I have all kinds of babies and granddaughters in their 30s, and Joan is hitting 40 yesterday, and it's just unbelievable how much satisfaction I get out of my family. What I was thinking in the night was how fortunate I am. I am happy. I am content. I always have been. I've known grief, but grief is not discontent. And underneath, I always knew that things would change, that I wouldn't always be grieving. And I'm very, very fortunate to have a nature of that sort and never be depressed. Another thing, I never have been envious of anyone. I've never wanted anything that another person has had. And I think the reason for that is that I've always felt that I could do anything in the world and that I could have anything in the world that I wanted if I wanted it badly enough and if I worked hard enough to get it. And I believe that's true of every individual. You can achieve your goals if you try. So here I am, and my husband has been dead since 1981. That's 24 years. And I have not married. I've been asked to marry several times, maybe 4 times. But I just like being single. I love being my own boss and not having to consult anyone about what I'm going to do. And the single life is great. And I do have dates and I do have boyfriends, and I love an escort to take me out to dinner and do all kinds of things. But, marriage, I had a perfect marriage, and that was it. I'm all through.
Anything else?
I live very happily and comfortably. I'm 87 and I'm in good health. My joints have kind of given out, but after all, you can have replacements. And I'm really a very happy woman.